Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I'm GlitchMonkey, streamer, ninja, YouTuber. In this video I'm going to cover some of the basics of Applied Energistics 2. I kind of consider this an AE2 101 type thing, where we're going to cover cables, channels, and the controller. I'm using the mod pack Direwolf 20 version, Minecraft version 1.7.10. The pack version is 1.0.0. You can get this pack off the Feed the Beast launcher. So main party packs. Anyway, I'd like to get started. First thing we're going to cover are the cables. We have a few different kinds of cables here. The first one here, the glass cable, which most people are used to seeing if you've played with Applied Energistics in the past. You have the covered cable, which again is from the older pack or version, but there's a couple of newer ones. This is the smart cable and the dense cable. So each cable has different kinds of properties for the most part. The primary one is channels. The first three, the glass cable, the covered cable, and the smart cable, all maintain 8 channels, while the dense cable can manage up to 32 channels. And I'll talk about that here in a moment. I also want to point out that cables come in different colors, and the colors, different colored cables won't connect to each other. The way to get them to connect to each other into a network is using the Fluix cables. And this holds true with all of the different kinds of Fluix cables. Okay, I'm going to talk about the channels now. One of the most important pieces of the new Applied Energistics mod pack. And I'm going to specifically point out the smart cable, because as you can see on the side of the smart cable, there's a couple of blue lines. Each one of those blue lines indicates a channel on that cable that's taken up. Any active devices that do things, perform operations, move inventory, or anything like that, take up a channel, including the interfaces for interacting with the inventories on the AE system. So on here I have an export bus and an interface. Each one of them takes up a channel because they are active devices. On the glass cable and the cover cable, you have no indicators of how many channels are being used up. That is the only difference between that and those in the smart cable. I prefer not to use these where I can, because I like to, one, see how many channels are being used, and two, they look a lot cooler. And as you can see on the colored ones, I'm using the smart cable so we can see how many devices are on it total. The dense cable can handle 32 channels, and on it I have 15 devices. And as you can see down here, the interface, the ME interface right here, none of these devices will connect directly into a dense cable. What will happen is the dense cable will produce a smart cable, effectively giving any device that's connected to it 8 channels. Components like the ME interface can manage additional devices and act as a natural part of the network. So if I attach one here, you'll see that this interface takes up 1 channel on this cable I put down, but 2 going into the dense cable. There is no smart cable connecting between here. This is produced by the dense cable itself. If we look over here, I have 2 more offshoots, each one connected with smart cable, so we can see the number of connections being used, channels. This one here on the end has 4. So it's using up 4 channels represented by the light blue color. And then the next section has 3 devices, and you'll see 3 brighter lines on it. If I added a 4th one to it, then it would fill up the 4th channel, and nothing more could be connected to this leg here. We have 2 lines represented on the dense cable because of these 2 different sections here. Total, they add up to more than one of the 32 channels, or 8 section channels. So it actually adds up to 9, 7, 8, 9, yes. And so therefore it's representing 2 channels on the dense cable. This one here you can see, same setup. It adds a 3rd line, well, a 4th line, because we have this other bit down here. If I take this off, you'll see total number of channels. Okay, I'm going to move on to the basics for the network. You'll notice that over here I have a ME controller setup hooked up on the top. Then over here I don't. Any network section or any network is limited to a total of 8 channels. I have a number of active devices on here that equals 8. So this network is completely filled up with devices that it can manage. In order to exceed that number, you need to install a controller. The controller can manage 32 channels per side of the block. It's not a total number of channels. It's limited to 32 per side. Okay, so if I take and add another device to this network, it's going to shut down because there's too many channels being used. The energy cell here does not take up a channel because it's not an active block. It just supplies power. It doesn't actually do anything. So as you can see, panels, the terminals, they all represent active devices because they can be used to do things with. And so they take up channels, the drives, the interfaces. So if I wanted to bring this back up and leave that new addition on there, I'd need to insert a controller in here in order to manage all of the different channels. Now, we have 2 going into this side, we have 3 going into this side, and we have 4 going into that side. That's the only thing that the controller does. It doesn't actively do anything other than allows more channels to be introduced into the network. The controllers themselves have some rules that go along with them. On the wiki, it indicates that no more than 2 controller blocks can be in any one access on a block. What that boils down to is a lot of experimentation. One rule that I go with when I'm putting them down is I try and leave 3 air block spaces around the outside of it, and generally you're gonna be alright if you follow that. But play around with it, try it, different configurations. As you can see, when you violate that rule, one of them doesn't render completely, and it actually gives you a different kind of graphic that says this is the problem block. And over here we have a working one where it doesn't violate the rule. What I want to cover now is a little bit in regards to networks and subnetworks and multiple networks being tied together. One thing to note, you cannot have 2 controllers, 2 separate controller devices on a single network. And this is what I'll represent here. You'll be able to see that. This is an active controller device. It's a multi-block structure. This is an active controller device. If I link them together, they both shut down because you can only have 1 controller multi-block on a network section at a time. This works over here without being cut off by this switch, because I have these quartz fiber cable sections connected in here. And what those do is only allow power to traverse that section. So I'm able to power two completely different networks using one power source. And this is how this will be used in crafting components or setups where you have multiple different things going on, things beyond 8 channels, but you still only want to get power into those sections and have a separate controller set up to manage those crafting components and stuff. We'll get into all that later. We're just covering the basics here. But as you can see, these are two completely different networks, even though they are seemingly connected. Excuse me. Each one of these networks only has 3 devices connected to them, and those devices are export buses and ME interfaces, right here. Export buses will output whatever the selected blocks or items that you give it into a connected block storage. So a chest or something similar to that. The interface is a bridge between the network and the adjacent block. It can be used to accept items or output items, depending on how you use it. It can be a little bit confusing. But to better show that, I set this one up here. You have an export bus pushing into an ME interface. Anything I push out with this export bus, will be accepted by this ME interface and added to the network. That's assuming I had storage on either side of these two different networks. Another thing to note, devices like the export bus and the interface and the import bus, they do not connect to the network that they're connected to or pointed at. So these devices maintain their separation between the two networks. They do not transport power or anything. They're a receptacle or something that just moves items to the next block over. And that's important to keep in mind when building crafting configurations and stuff like that. So when I cover that a little bit here, I have an example. What I have here is I have 2 different networks. One of them is managed by a network controller, and one of them that is not. Both of them are legal networks. This one is allowed 32 channels, even though we're not using it. This one is only allowed 8, but that's okay because we're only using 2. So inside of here I have stone, and if I want to export that stone into this chest. Okay, so this export bus is exporting into this interface, and this interface is then in turn going to output the stone into this inventory. And I have a storage bus here that manages that inventory. If I didn't have a chest with a storage interface, then it would be an ME chest or drives or anything like that that would store items. So when I put this in here, in order to tell it I want to export stone, you'll see that this chest starts filling up with stone. The export bus can have upgrades added to it. I'm not going to cover that in this, in order to speed up that process. Okay, say I have enough stone in this network, or I have a quarry set up to it, or I want to have a dump chest and just dump items into this chest. What I can do is I have an import bus set up on this chest, and it does the same thing as the export device, only in reverse. So I'll hook it up, and you'll see that this stone starts being put back into the other network. Now remember, these are two separate networks that I'm changing between here as well. So if I wanted to, I could take this one, and this is just going to create a loop. This one's going to export the stone into this chest, and then from this chest it's going to be put back into the ME system on this side. And you can see the stone popping in and out as it's put in and pulled out. Two different networks manipulating the same inventory in order to manage items. This is where the complication comes from in the new ME system. As long as those networks don't connect for the channels, then you'll be fine. Anyway, that concludes this tutorial. I hope it helps in your adventures in Minecraft, modded Minecraft. Thanks once again for taking the time to watch the video. Please also take a moment to like the video or dislike the video and leave comments to the respective choices. It's like feedback for future videos. Also, if you enjoyed it or found it useful, helpful, please subscribe. And until next time, take care.